Once again, good morning. It's a kind of warm day out there for this time of year, I suppose. Or so people say. It's warm for this time of year, but I can remember some Decembers that were pretty warm and some Februarys too. So if it stays like this till spring and then warms up, I'll be happy. So I'm not complaining for sure. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, we've been in that for a couple of weeks. I don't know if we'll get done today or not. I'm not really concerned about that too much. We'll do what we can for as long as we can, right? We finished with chapter 3, verse 14 last week. We discussed it a little bit, and there may be more to be said about it. In verse 14 in chapter 3, it says, I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it that men should fear before him. And so what do we get out of this? After we read chapter 1, chapter 2, and up to this point in chapter 3, we have been studying about things that we have no control over. And there's some things that we can do to enjoy our lives. And he almost mentions that repeatedly in this book about enjoy the fruits of your labor, the things you've done, enjoy it. He's emphasizing, the preacher here, the writer of Ecclesiastes, is saying you're going to face all these challenges. There's going to be things that you'll face. There'll be things that's going to happen, and there's not anything you can do about it, but you just got to get through it. We need to be more concerned about how we react to change than worry about the change. And so when we think about all that he has written to this point, what we understand that God's in charge. Now we live in an ever-changing world, as we discussed last week, but we're serving a non-changing God, a never-changing God. And so we got someone we can depend on every day, regardless of our hardships, heartaches, trials, troubles, tribulations, temptations, whatever it is we face. We must, in our hearts, remember we are serving an unchanging God. And verse 14 says, it shall be forever. What God doeth, it shall be forever. We can't change forever, but we can enjoy today. We can enjoy it, knowing that we have an unchanging God. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it, and God doeth it. You can't add to what God has created. You can't take away from it. No way to change it. And mankind really needs to understand who made things the way they are. I often think in my mind about the time when God created man from the dust of the ground, there in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7, I believe it is. And God created man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The air we breathe today is from God. Our breath comes from God. We can't change that. And we'll find out later in this book that when that breath leaves the body's going to go back to the dust of the ground. And so we know, if we never read the Bible, if you've never picked up a Bible, if you've never heard a sermon taught or a scripture read, you know that you're going to die. That's not a secret. And God has put these things in motion and in place, and they're not going to be changed. You can't add to it, and you can't take away from it. If you do, you're just messing your own life up. You're forsaking your own mercy, as we learned in second chapter of the book of Jonah. We don't want to give up our own mercy. And then at the end of this verse, it says that men should fear before him. The sermon this morning is going to be about the good news of fearing God. And if I get the scriptures in right order, then you're going to see what God is telling us, you and me, about why we should fear God. And it's for our benefit. But if you stop and think about this one verse of all that God has done that we've already studied up to this point in Ecclesiastes, what we studied in the book of Jonah even all the way back to Jude and all the way back to 1 John. If we incorporate all of that into this, then we can see God is right. Okay? So man just needs to say, okay, God's right, and that settles it. So let's do what God says. Now, why should we fear? Where should the fear be? Why should we fear God? Well, if he can do all these things, and he has, if he can create the world and create us and create the system of nature and everything that we've already studied about here, I think you should be afraid of someone like that. Because of what? If he can do all that, what can he do to you? What can he do to me? You know, the day the planes flew into the building up in New York City, there was a fear put in men's hearts. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of people. A lot of people were afraid of what was going to follow that. We were under attack by a foreign enemy. And there was a fear. And you know what they did to those buildings and what they did to all the people's lives that they've cost since at that time and since then? It's not going to be measured. Won't even figure into what God's judgment will be like. So we need to fear before him and listen to God and understand what he's created. Right? We need to understand that so we can be afraid not to do what God wants us to do. Brother Floyd?
Yeah. I was thinking over in 1 Peter, where it talks about the 20th, first chapter, 20th verse, where it talks about Christ. He was foreordained before the foundation of the world, but was manifested in these last days. That tells me that even, you mentioned creation a while ago, even before God created heavens and the earth and all of that, his plan was already set.
Yep.
He made his plan before. In other words, nothing is done on the spur of the moment with God.
Right.
His plan is set in motion even before he created the world. And it's going to stand. Everything that God has ordained is going to be, regardless of what man does. He has set in order regulations that man is to go by, and as we read there in that 14th verse, I believe it was, that nothing can be taken from it or nothing added to it. You can't add to what God has already set in motion. This is a plan, and you can't add to it. It's going to be that way.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you, I, or anyone on this earth decides to do.
Right. Whether you like it or don't like it,
Right.
it's a done deal. Let's go back to and you don't have to turn there, but in Genesis, God created, in chapter 1, created everything, right? And in chapter 2, verse 2, he says, and on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. Now God, in the last verse, verse 31 of chapter 1, and God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good, and the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Okay, now God created everything, and everything he created was very good. Even what we're studying in Ecclesiastes, right? It was very good. He rested on the seventh day. Now I want to ask this question. I don't know the answer to it. Maybe somebody here can help me. Well, once God set this in motion, and it said he rested, is he doing anything different from the plan that he had on the seventh day, the sixth day, all of those times that he created, everything he put in motion? And he rested on the seventh day. Has he done anything different since then? The plan was already in place, wasn't it? Just as Floyd told us, as we read from 1 Peter chapter 20, I believe he said. So when you read these things and you put it together, you understand the greatness of God. You can't miss it. Mankind, in general, is missing the greatness of God. You know, the car you drive today was made in the first 6 days of creation. Have you ever thought about, and we've discussed this here before, everything we make comes from the ground. Tell me something that mankind creates, and when I'm talking about creating, invent something, make what we've already invented better. Where do we get that material at? From the ground. You know, scientists, they keep saying, well, this happened, that happened, this happened. God rested on the seventh day. Everything he made was good. It was very good. Even the plan to save your soul was already in place. Wow, what a God. And you don't want to fear him? I'm not going to listen to God. I'll do it my way. Well, just as Brother Floyd pointed out to us, we can't change it. God's plan's God's plan. It's going to stay in place. We need to fear before God. We really do. And I'm not just saying we under this roof. I'm saying mankind. Mankind needs to realize what God, who God is, and what God can do, and what God has already done. Brother Philip, several weeks ago, taught a class on how God talks to us through his creation. And the Bible tells us, I think it's in Psalm 19, that their voices are heard everywhere. There's nowhere their voice is not heard. Whose voice? The voice of creation. The voice of nature, the sun coming up, the sun going down. Where does that happen at on this earth? Where does life exist at on this earth? Where did it come from? All these things, when you put it together, it's so plain to see. Even if you never had a Bible, you got to know there's something greater than man. You have to. You can't miss it. Can't miss it. But mankind, I remember playing golf with Clinton Belcher one day, and he hit a golf ball as straight and pretty as I ever seen. And I said, man, you can't hide talent, can you? He looked at me and he said, well, you're doing a pretty good job of it. Because I couldn't hit one straight. But the point being is, the best we can be is still not good in God's eyes. But here's the thing about God. He has made it available, made it obvious. It's not hidden. It's out in the open. Everything that we need to get to heaven. That's pretty good God, isn't it? And now here in the book of Ecclesiastes, under the sun, we're studying about what goes on under the sun. And so far, I don't know about you all, but everything we've read in here is like reading about living here today. I mean, it's not like it was wrote 1,100 years before Christ came. You know, we talk about, well, back there in them old days, you know, way back then, it was all different then. What we're reading about here is the same. So who's the greatest? God's the greatest. Isn't that great? So let's fear. Men should fear before him. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be has already been. Nothing new under the sun, huh? How would someone know that? Well, this preacher, he searched it out with wisdom. He didn't just go out there haphazardly. If we go back to chapter 1 and chapter 2, we find out that he wasn't just haphazardly out here researching what goes on under the sun, what man should be doing. what he is seeing, everything going on now in his day. Let's look at it from the preacher who wrote this in his time when he wrote this. Everything he's seeing, everything right now, he says, has already been. Okay, now let's move up to our day. Everything that we see now has already been, right? God rested on the seventh day, but he said everything he saw, everything he had created was very good. That which is to be has already been. So out in the future, when you look to the future, you wonder what it's going to be like. Well, just look to the past and you'll see the future. Under the sun, mankind is not changing. We haven't changed since the garden, and we're not going to change. Remember in the garden when Adam blamed God, that woman you gave me, wasn't my fault I ate that stuff, that woman you gave me. Mankind's the same way today. Not my fault. We ain't changed a bit, have we? And God requireth that which is past. The things that we do on this earth, we're going to have to answer for. But he also requires the past to be in the future. So when we read this, we can see we need to be ready every day. Now, the next two verses is going to help explain a lot for us under the sun. Verse 16, the preacher writes, "And moreover I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, and there is a time there for every purpose and for every work." Now, verse 16, what the preacher saw under the sun in a place of judgment, that there was wickedness in the judgment. Now, I looked up the word iniquity and wickedness in this verse, and the Greek or the Hebrew word for both are exactly the same. Okay? On the Strong's Concordance, the number is exactly the same for both of them. So the wickedness and the iniquity are the same thing. So if you got a judgment of wicked people that are under the sun now, let's don't get this messed up. Let's talk about under the sun. At this wicked judgment, there's judgment that wicked people are making judgments on people, other judgments. Well, even in the place of righteousness, there was wickedness. You know, many times on this earth, we got a problem with a neighbor or something, and we go to a place, we file charges against them or sue them or whatever. We go to court with the intent of making what's wrong right. And it doesn't turn out that way. So even when righteous people go to find help under the sun for judgment, it's not always honest. It's not always true. It's not always done right. There's wickedness in the wicked places. There's wickedness for those who depend on righteous judgment here on this earth under the sun. Is that right or wrong? Does everybody understand, or anybody got a comment or a question? So when we talk about judgment under the sun, it's hard to say what's right and what's wrong, because we don't know how it's going to turn out. But this preacher who's writing this book has made it clear that he has been there and he's seen it. He's seen wickedness in both places.
That's talking about man's judgment.
Right.
Not God's judgment.
Right.
Not to be confused with God's.
And verse 17 clears that up. That's man's judgment. That's what I'm talking about, under the sun. When we seek justice, when we seek a wrong to be made right under the sun among us, And when I say us, people, when we go someplace that we're counting on getting it straightened out, there's still wickedness there. It's not, man does not have a perfect system to make everything right. Does that make sense? Isn't that what he's saying? Even the judges are partial in their judgments. And they,
Brother Brent, it goes along with what we just studied over there in Psalms 119, where he said, teach me good judgment and knowledge. Good only comes from God.
right.
Man, his thoughts will be continue evil all the time when he leads to his own devices.
Why would the psalmist even ask God to teach him good judgment if he already had it?
That's exactly right.
He don't have it.
He applies it with knowledge.
Right.
You have to know the knowledge that's spoken of throughout the Bible is knowledge of God, what God provides,
Right.
what God will give if we'll seek it. And to know good judgment, you take God out of the equation, man will never have it.
Well, under the sun, what does is man capable without God? And that's kind of what's being said here in the next these few verses is basically saying what the preacher here is writing is, hey, without God, all of it's useless anyway. I mean, it's useless. There's no good in it. What's the purpose of it if there's nothing, if there's no God, if there's no religion, if there's no purpose, what's the point of it? But now listen to verse 17. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. So all this in verse 16, God will be the final judge on it. Whether good or bad, and no matter, if you go all the way over to Ecclesiastes 12, the last verse of the book, 12:14, for God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. God's going to have the final say. Now, with that in mind, go back to verse 14, and what can you add to it or take away from it? So in verse 16, what he's saying is man's not capable of making righteous judgment without God. And God's going to have the final say. So when we put it all together, we know who has the final say, and that final say is God. Now, go back to verse 14 again, the last part of that. We should fear before God. Why should we fear before God? Because what he has put in motion, you can't add to it, you can't take away from it. He's going to have the final say. Quit trying to outthink God. Quit trying to be a God. Quit trying to do the things that's God's business and not our business. Let's be servants of God, and let us not try to be God. And when I say we, I'm talking about the people on the earth, under the sun. That's what we're talking about. What goes on under the sun.
Verse 18 is the last statement there. It explains the difference between God and man.
Yeah, well, what he's doing in verse 18, he's saying, man, you better not be blaming God. I mean, that's basically what he's saying there. But God's going to have, in verse 17, a time there for every purpose and for every work. On the judgment day, there's going to be a separation of the right and the wrong. And that's going to be the time. There's appointed time. God has appointed a time in which he will judge the whole world. Man has an appointment with death. It is appointed on the man once to die, and after this, the judgment. So, under the sun is where we get ready for the judgment. So in verse 17, God's going to be the final judge. There's going to be a time and a place for that purpose, and he's going to judge everything. Verse 18, I said in my heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. In other words, what the preacher is saying here, the way I understand it, is that God is going to make it obvious to mankind that they are not God. They're not the final judge.
I believe that's what it's all about, is for man to learn his position in life. When our forefathers put together our Constitution and declared us one nation under God, I truly think they understood the principle that man was never on the plane of God.
Right.
And to function as a nation, one must be under God, placing God above all of it, and above self, and above everything there is. It's a matter of knowing. He said, stand still and know that I am God.
Right.
There's a big difference.
Yep. So God is not to blame for man's unrighteousness. I think it's so easy to make a mistake and blame somebody else. And we've all seen it, and more than likely we've all done it. When something goes wrong, it's because of this, because of that. Now, there's a difference between a reason for doing something and being excused, that it's excusable. Now, when I was in school, I had a reason I had to go to the principal's office. That's because the teacher told me to, because I'd done something wrong. So I go to the principal's office, and I either face the punishment or he excuses me of it. But the reason I'm there is I was guilty of doing something against the rules of that school. And there was nobody guilty of it but me. And that's why I was sent to the principal's office. Now the punishment, I either faced the punishment or it was excused. But there is a difference between excuse and reason. Now if we go out here and sin, like Adam and Eve did in the garden, and then we go, well, God, it wasn't my fault. Well, here in verse 18, what the psalm, or what the writer, the preacher is saying here is, you can't blame God. We're all accountable. He's saying, you're going to clear God of the guilt because he's not guilty, you're guilty. And it closes that they might see that they themselves are beasts. That we as a people, these people he's talking about in verse 16, about judging and stuff, and all of those, we're not capable of doing what God does. So let's quit trying to do that, right? Verse 19, for that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth the beast. Even one thing befalleth them. As the one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they have all one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast, for all is vanity. Man has no preeminence above anything on this earth. Now remember what we're talking about, under the sun. Okay? Don't go, well, God created man to rule the earth. Well, not without God, we're no better than the animals. That's what he's saying here, okay? Under the sun, man is a beast. How do we know that? Well, if the animals die because their breath, they lose their breath, they quit breathing, they're dead. When we quit breathing, we're dead. We're no better. We've got the same end. Death is coming to all of us, both animal and people. And without God, under the sun, we're no better than the beast. Same thing. We all have one breath. We have no preeminence. All go to one place. All are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. If there's no God, and you're living under the sun, I've always wondered about people who says they don't believe there's a God. They call themselves atheists, which I don't believe there is such a thing. I think everybody's got it born in them that there's some superior being. That's just my personal opinion. But I always wondered why they go by the rules. You ever wonder that? I don't believe there's a God. Are you married? Yes. Well, would you be mad if your wife started running around with other men? Well, she better not. You got a car? Yeah. Well, what if somebody stole that car? Well, they better not. Why does it matter? Why does it matter? If there's no God, there's nothing to answer to. Do anything you want. Why does it matter? Even atheists go by the rules. Do you ever wonder why everybody stops at a red light when it's red? Let me rephrase that. You wonder why most people stop at a red light when it's red? That's the rule. That's the law. That's what we do, right? So really and truthfully, why would you go by the rules if there's nothing to answer to? Why do we have societies on this planet that function pretty doggone good? You know? We got a lot of bad things going on. I understand that. But you can get in your car and go through town without worrying about, most of the time, somebody recklessly driving all through town and carrying on and running red lights. You feel pretty safe. People on the right side of the road, you pass each other. I'm amazed there's not more wrecks than there are with the number of automobiles that we have moving. People going by the rules. People kind of keeping things organized. Well, if there is no rules, if there is no God, if there's nothing under the sun but us, why do we have rules? You know why? Because without God, it's all vanity. All going back to the dust of the ground. Verse 21, who knoweth the spirit of man that goeth upward, and the spirit of the beast that goeth downward to the earth? This is a question. Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion, for who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? Who knoweth about the spirit of man? Again, we go back to chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes, and we're going to finish chapter 12 before we get the rest of it done. Verse 7, then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. When the spirit of man leaves the body's dead. Right? Anybody disagree with that? Death is a separation, and the separation is the spirit and the body. The body's going back to the dust of the ground where it came from. The spirit's going back. Where did the spirit come from? Well, it said come from God who gave it, right? Where do we read that at? We go back to Genesis chapter 2. God breathed into the nostrils of man. Man became a living soul by the breath of God. So that's where it came from. That's where it goes back to. So who knoweth the spirit of man that goeth upward? Who knows the answer to that? Well, God knows. Well, under the sun, we're not capable. That's what we've been studying, right?
Over in the New Testament it says, say not in your heart, who shall ascend into heaven, which bring Christ down from above? Or who shall descend, which brings Christ up from the deep? I think I got that right.
Sounds familiar. So,
That we ain't supposed to make that call. Who knows?
I don't think we can make. I think we can judge righteous judgment. I think the Bible tells us righteous judgment. If you see me steal a car, you're pretty well convinced I'm a car thief. That's a righteous judgment, and such things as that. But here he's comparing a beast and a man spirit. Now, I don't know. I've heard people say that when an animal dies, that's the end of it. But if an animal never disobeyed God and God is the one that gave it breath, then now we're meddling around again, something ain't none of our business. The secret things belong to God, so we'll just let God take care of that, okay? There's no need to even debate something we don't know. We'll just let God take care of that. Anybody have any more questions, comments on chapter 3? I hope I'm not boring you to death. I think there's so much in chapter 3 talking about all this list of stuff, a time and a place for everything. And under the sun, we don't have no hope. And we can't change it. But with God, we do. And in verse 22, talks about man should rejoice in his own works. You know, he's indicated that before in the other chapter. But that we should enjoy what we do. Why can we enjoy it? Because there is a God. Without God under the sun, there's no point to it. But we can rejoice because we know there's a God. And our labor here, striving to get to heaven, if you go back to 1 John chapter 5, verse 13, I believe it is, you can know you're saved. You can know it. So let's enjoy. Let's enjoy life. Enjoy the works. We go out and labor and toil to get whatever we get, but at the same time, let's not forget to do good. We can do good with what we've labored and toiled for, and many in here, if not all, have abundantly given to others and helped others and done things for people. I mean, unbeknownst to others. And we don't need to brag about it because that's what we're supposed to be doing anyway, right? I mean, nobody needs to know what you're doing, giving to other people, helping other people, whatever it might be. But, I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing anyway. That's nothing to brag about. That's just what we're supposed to be doing.
I think, Brother Brett, that verse 22 should serve us as a good reminder that we have no control on how we come into this world. We have no control over that whatsoever. And we have zero control over what goes on after we depart from this
Right.
world. But that little dash that you done did a good job years ago teaching about what was important, that little dash between those two events. And that, I mean, God wants us to be happy.
Yeah.
He commands us throughout the New Testament to rejoice.
Yeah.
He said evermore. So, you know, there's something to worry about if you go to the grave unprepared to meet God.
Yep.
But you go to the grave prepared to meet God, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. Not one concern. You don't care what's going on after you leave.
Right.
You know?
Well, you don't really care what's going on now if you're ready to go. I mean, I know you're concerned. We're supposed to be concerned while we're here. But the truth of the matter is, if we're not going to let anybody take our salvation away from us, if we're not willing to give up our salvation, if we're going to continue through all the battles and fight the good fight of faith, if we're going to do all that, then you go do whatever you want. I'll help you get to heaven if you want me to help you, but if you don't want me to help you, I'm still going to go to heaven. Right? You can't be a stumbling block to me unless I let you be a stumbling block to me. And the way that verse 22 closes, for who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? Who's going to bring you back? You ever wonder, did Abraham Lincoln ever come and see what he's accomplished? No.
Only in the minds of other men.
Right. Okay, we'll pick up chapter 4 next week, unless someone has a comment or a question or anything. Anybody have anything? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. You okay, Melissa?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing great.
Did you have a good Christmas?
Yep. Sit around and eat all the time.
So we're doing good.
I think I started the day before Thanksgiving, it quit yet. Yeah. Sandy asked me yesterday, she said, what do you want for supper? I said, well, I don't know. I said, when does supper start? I've been eating ever since I got out of bed. Only had one meal today, and it started when I